Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Meyer, and today we're going to talk a little bit about coiling. And there's different things you can do, different ways to do coiling, and different things you can do with it. There's some coiling that's very decorative and very pretty, and there's some that's just the main structural way to do it. And for today we're just going to talk about the structural parts of it. And we are going to use this, we're going to do both, but we're going to use this as the basis for some surface pattern work that we're going to do with slip. So, first of all, when you coil, one of the benefits of coil is that you can make a profile that curves in and out. And for our purposes, it's not going to, we want it so that it doesn't leak. So we are going to start with a slab at the bottom rather than coil. You could technically coil from the very bottom, but we're going to put a slab base on it and build up from there. So I'm slipping and scoring my base that I already made because we've done that before. And then as far as coils go, which I should show you how to make a coil first. You can start with a ball of clay, or just push the ball of clay into sort of a barrel shape. And one thing you want to be very careful of is that you don't start getting it like that, actually. You don't want it to get hollow, and usually it doesn't. Except if you don't go 360 degrees around. So just be aware of this. I'm going to put a line in there, and I want you to think about, if you just coil back and forth like this, it's going to start getting flat because that line isn't going all the way around. You want to coil in a way that's going to really roll the whole distance. You could twist the clay, and that helps too a little bit once it's a little bigger. But just be aware of that. And if it starts to get to be an oval shape, just put the tall end of the oval up and press down on it, and be very careful that you're not getting it too flat, because then it's going to fold over on itself and it's going to be more like a straw than a solid coil. The other thing is, because these are thin, you want to keep your hands wet and keep your clay conditioned. Okay, so I'm pressing down. It got to be an oval. I'm going to do this. And my hands are so wet that now the clay is sticking. But I want to keep rolling it in different parts so that it gets flatter. And I'm spreading my fingers apart and pushing the clay out. And when I get to the point where I have enough for two hands, we're going to do that even more so. And just sort of stretch the clay out. You want to try and keep the consistency the same for every part of the coil and every coil that you do. And splay your fingers to cover as much coil as you can. Work in the center. If it's, if you're doing two hands and the middle isn't being taken care of, just be aware of that. I can make these coils longer than my base is in circumference, and just keep rolling around almost like you're going up and down in a parking garage. You're just going to keep spiraling up. Okay? So that's how you make a coil. We'll start with this one. You want them to be consistent because they are the walls of your clay project. You're going to do a lot of slipping and scoring with this. You want to make sure that as the clay shrinks, you don't want it to shrink and come away. You want it to be scored up, get some slip in there, and then as it shrinks, it's going to bond tightly. Okay? So that's the point of it. So we want strong walls, even though it's starting with coils. Okay? So I'm going to start here. Slipped part to slipped part, go around the edge. And now when I get here, I can keep going, but there's going to be that hole there. So what I want to do is I want to create a little ramp. Use my fettling knife for that. A very slow, gradual ramp up. Okay? It goes down to the base. And now my coil is going to be landing on top of itself. So we want to score and slip the top of it. And the difference between this and the slab project we did where we made cylinders, we made mugs, is this, you could stay directly above, keep your coils directly above each other and make a cylinder. But the beauty is you can also start to extend your circles a little bit so that your sides, each rotation gets a little larger, just slightly larger. If you do it too quickly, it's not going to have the structural integrity that you need. So I'm going to make this second go around just slightly bigger, and I'm going to start with a new coil. I made up some ahead of time so that we could make this go a little faster. I'm going to score it. My clay is relatively wet. Well, it was when I started. Slip and score the next layer on here. I don't want my circles to go out too fast. Okay, and I'll show you a little chart that we can discuss that in a minute. Okay, where two coils are going to meet, I would overlap them. Use your fettling knife, cut at an angle, okay, through both coils, and then pull away the excess, and they should fit right into each other perfectly. Okay, and then you can keep going and just slightly get your coils out. If you find a weaker part in the coil, you can either miter them like we just did, give them a little press, but you want to address it. You don't want to ignore it. Okay, and as we get around, starting another row, I'm going to maybe put one more coil on here, and then I'll show you how we're going to make these walls not leak, because we can't leak. We might even make candles out of some of these, so we certainly don't want hot wax leaking around. Okay, each coil is just slightly larger than the one below it. Okay, and let me explain that before I actually start to seal this up. If you look in here directly at it as a circle, you should see a little bit of the coils below it, but when you look on the outside, you don't see that, because this bottom coil is slightly smaller in circumference than the next one. That's a little bigger, and then this one's a little bigger, and we're going out. So what that's going to do is make our profile go out at an angle. We can then turn around and go back in again, incrementally smaller. But I want to show you a couple of things. Okay, you need to join those coils together. What you do not want to do is pinch your two coils, particularly right where they meet. It's weak enough where the two are meeting up, but you don't want to make your wall too thin in those spots, so you do not squeeze or pinch. Okay? What we want to do is we want to keep all our coils about the same size. These are directly on top of each other. They could be at an angle. But you're only pushing the clay from the outermost part of that circle into the crack and connecting to this one. And you're going to take the clay that's in the outermost part of the circle and connect here. And you're going to do that on the inside and on the outside, so you won't see the coils anymore. But you're not going to mess with the integrity of the center of the coils. Where they overlap each other, that's your wall. That's all the connecting of the walls is happening on the edges, but this center does not get pinched or squeezed in at all. Okay? Now, this next little picture here, I would say at least 60 or 70% of the coil should fall over the coil below it. So what you don't want to do is stagger them so much that this coil is barely on top of this coil, and this coil is barely on top of that. If you do that, your wall's not going to have a lot of structural integrity, and it might look okay when you start, but if you start weighing more and more coils on top of it, the weight of the upper coils is going to crash and burn the bottom ones. Okay? So you want to make sure that it's a slow, gradual transition and that it's a strong wall, so that it will hold the weight, whether you're going back in or you're going further out. Okay? And if you were to look at that from the top, here's your coil. Say you have 4 different colors. You wouldn't have 4 different color coils, but if you look at the bottom green one, you might see a little bit of that green one, and then you'd see a little bit of the purple one and a little bit of the yellow. But the bulk of them, they're all this size, but they're all overlapped by, most of the coil is overlapped by the coil above it. Probably this yellow one is still a little bit over the green one. Probably the blue one is still a little bit over the pink one, like you'd see here. You know, if you go straight down from that blue one, it's not only supported by the yellow, it's supported by the pink one. The yellow is supported by the green one. So you want to think about that as you're making your walls from the very beginning. Having said that, we're going to connect them. And we're going to do that. Before we get all the way done, I'm going to connect the ones on the inside. I'll try and squeeze this over here so that you can see it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bottom one and I'm going to take just that outer bit of the coil and press it down into the base so that it's sealed up and that no water or wax or whatever we put in there can get out. Okay? And I'm supporting it on the outside if I have to, but I'm just pressing that down. You can do it with your fingers if it's open enough. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to press up, or you could press the other coil down. It's just more comfortable for me in this situation to press up. And I'm going to do the same thing connecting all my coils so that you can't see through. And if a little bit builds up on there and you need it in a spot to make it thicker or to fill a hole, you can just use that to sort of putty it up there. Okay? So I would do this every, I don't know, 4 or 5 coils, I guess. As you're going out, it's not so important, but as you start to make your circles smaller and make it, you know, maybe it's going to have like a bottle top and get very small. You want to make sure you've secured your coils as you go, because your opening is going to get smaller and smaller and it's going to make it harder and harder to do. Okay? So that's how we do the outside, and I'd go back and smooth that out more. But I have not messed with the center core of those coils, just that rounded part that sticks out. Then we're going to do something similar on the outside. I'm using a metal rib, and what I like about the metal ribs is you can bend them. Okay? I tend to like to go at a 45-degree angle when I do this. So, for instance, that's, let me see if I can get it in there. That's my rib nice and straight. I'm going to take it and I'm going to arc it like this so that it's wrapping around the contour of the, let's call it a vase, the container. And then I'm dragging just that outer bit. I'm supporting it from the inside and dragging at a 45-degree angle. I think it feels better. And this will build up on the rib. That's okay. You can squish that into the cracks between the coils when you need to. Okay? So my walls do get thinner than the coils were when I put them on there, but there's still some structural integrity and some thickness to the coils. Okay? Take that and use it to your advantage. Now, I also want to be very careful to make my profile the same all the way around. So make sure your circles stay circles. You know, they can spiral up, but you don't want it to be out more in some areas and in more in other areas, or your shape is going to look pretty sad. Okay. So this is the quick version of that, but my walls are still just a little thinner than my pinky probably. And you can patch an area where it might be a little too thin. We'll make it pretty later. The reason that we're doing these walls solid is because we're going to play with some different slip techniques on top. And so we want a solid wall for this. We will do some sort of more decorative coiling down the road. So I'm going to keep going and make the next circles get a little smaller. Okay, take another coil. You want to keep your coils wet. I made coils in advance, but you can't make them too far in advance because they dry out pretty quickly because they're small. Okay, so let's say I'm going to take this one, and if they start getting all crackly, just keep your hands wet and recondition the coils as you go. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to miter my edge for this coil. Cut through at an angle. The coil below it. It's already attached. I shouldn't have attached that quite so well. But that's the theory, is we're going to miter those together. Keep going. Now my circles are going to get smaller and smaller as I go. So you'll be able to see a little bit more on the outside, not on the inside. And I don't want to do it too dramatically, too quickly. You want to stand up and look in, and you want to look at it from the side and spin it all the way around. Okay, maybe we'll put one more on there and then move on. Now, we could make these very, very big. We have some in the other room. You can make the coils a little bigger if that's the case. We have some in the other room that, I don't know, they probably hold 5 gallons or more. You can make this as big or as small as you want. I'm going to show you in a different video down the road how to do a flange and how to do a lid, all different kinds of lids. And you can make, you want to make a flange if you're going to do that so it will lock in place. Okay, but that's another day. So as these get smaller, my shape is beginning to curve in. We would do the top of this, level it out, and the bottom like we did on the mug. Okay, I'm not doing it yet because I've got more going on. Make sure that that's consistently going in all the way around. And now as it gets smaller, it's harder and harder to get inside to do this, so be aware that you might need to smooth your insides more regularly as your shape gets smaller. And I'm supporting it on the outside as I'm dragging on the inside. Then you can get in there with a sponge and just sort of smooth it, make sure there's no problems. Okay. I'm not going to take the time now because I want to make this video short enough that it doesn't take all day. So, we're going to take the rib, do the same thing on the outside. Now you could leave some of it decorative, but we're going to do that too. I'm supporting it on the inside as I'm dragging. And I like to drag at about a 45-degree angle. I think it just feels better that way. So you can make those circles as small as you want. Just make sure that you've secured the walls before it gets so small that you can't get your hand in there. Keep this wet. Now, ultimately, we're going to put a layer of terracotta slip on the outside of this and do some sgraffito work. You want to press down every once in a while, too, to really secure the slip. I should have probably been doing that more often than I let on here. All right. Now I think for the sake of time, you guys get the idea. Didn't seal that down very well there, but I'm going to trim it so it won't really matter. You want to get to the point you can't see your cracks. Okay. We can smooth this down with a sponge. We can go back over it. So those walls, they're just a little thinner than my pinky. You want to make sure that everything is completely round where it needs to be round, and that your profile is the same on all sides. Okay? Clean this off. Use it somewhere if you need it, if there's an area that needs a little extra support. Stuff works well for that. Make sure your inside hasn't cracked while you were messing with the outside. And you can put a sponge to it too. Okay. So you're going to fine tune. Make sure your profile is good. You can make, like I said, you can make it much bigger if you wanted to. One thing you want to do is when you get it the way you want it, inside and out, find your lowest point, which is probably right here. Spin it. And I'm not pushing all the way through the clay, I'm just drawing a line at this point. But I've anchored my elbow so my hand is not moving, the wheel is moving. Now ultimately that works better if I put it in the middle of the wheel first. This time I'm pushing a little harder. This works well with two people too. If you've got somebody who can spin the wheel for you, it's a little easier. And you're going to go around until you can trim that off. Now, we made a nice lip on the mugs because you're going to drink out of them. But if you were going to put a lid on this, you might want it flat. Okay? In which case you would still use a sponge, smooth it, but you can keep the corners on it. And then there's all sorts of lids and flanges that we'll work on in a separate video down the road. So, that's that. You want to take your time, fine tune. We're going to do all sorts of things to it. As a matter of fact, I can show you, whoops, not with my white clay hands. This is one I just made before I realized the video camera wasn't working. And we put slip on it. I'm going to make a separate video and we're going to talk about the terracotta slip and all the different things you can do with that. So if you have any questions on coiling, give me a yell, and we can talk about it in class, or you can send me an email if you need to know beforehand. Have a great day.